Hello, welcome to the first of hopefully a series of tutorial videos about some of the new features that have been added to CocoaSplit over the last, 4 or 5 months that I haven't had a chance to really document outside of some brief mentions in GitHub commit messages and the release notes. This video will cover layout constraints and parent-child input associations, or if you want to call them sublayers, that would be a familiar term for many. Easiest way is to just create a small demonstration here. So we'll create a text input. Let's set the color of the text to something not white. Maybe change the font size a little bit, and let's set a background color so we can see the size of the input. Actually, I don't know why I'm doing that. There we go. Alright, so there we have an input. There's some text. It's on a otherwise blank layout canvas, and you can move this around as you would please. You get these little magnetic guidelines that tell you when your centers have hit, centers, your edges have hit centers or edges, etc. Let's say you wanted to just put this at the bottom right. We could use the little magnetic guidelines and attach it to the bottom right. Looks okay, but the problem you would have is if you ever resized this layout, it's no longer pinned to the bottom right, because the positions are just XY coordinate pixel values, and when you resize the layout, it doesn't change those values in any of the inputs, so it stays at the same value, but obviously you've got a lot more layout because you've made it larger. So to make something like this easier, constraints were what was added a while back. And the way these work is you have the left column here is the edge of the input that you're configuring, right? So the left edge would be here, right, top, bottom. The centers are where you expect. Second column is the edge of the input's parent that you want this edge to be constrained to. So, and we'll get to the offset in a little bit. So say you wanted to do the exact same thing you did before. You want this input to be at the bottom right. In the case of constraints, you would just take the right edge, which is this, of the input, and tell it needs to be at the right edge of its parent, right? You see it moves. Then you do the same thing with the bottom edge. This looks almost exactly like we had moved it here, except the difference is now when we change the dimensions of the layout, it stays where we constrained it, which is great if at some point you decide to change the resolution you would stream at and you already had a layout set up. Things that you want constrained to edges, you can just use the constraint here and it will always be there. If you don't want it directly on the edge, you can use the offsets. These are effectively, think of them as margins. So in this case, for the right one, you want to move it to the left, which is actually negative. Right, so we could do 10 pixels on either edge. And as you see, it moves it, and it keeps that spacing no matter what. So always 10 pixels from the edge, no matter what you do. One quirk to keep in mind with constraints is even though we've constrained this here, we can move it. But if we try to resize it, it will jump back to where it was constrained to. Basically, constraints are applied when things change sizes or need to be. There are a few other triggers that can cause relayout, but primarily it would be size changes. If you want to have the freedom to resize it again, you can just go back to the constraints in the adjust tab, hit reset constraints, it clears them all. You can move this around now. You can resize it however you want. So what else can we do with constraints? You can center things, right? So same problem. Like say we move this around, we decide we want it centered, we use the guidelines, put it in the center. Later we decide to resize this. It's not centered anymore. You do the exact same thing as you did for the bottom right. You go to the adjust tab, but this time you want to adjust the horizontal and vertical centers to the parent's horizontal and vertical centers. Now, let me redo that with it not already centered, so you can see it move. Right, horizontal center to horizontal center, vertical center to vertical center. And again, if you resize this, stay centered. And the same quirky thing applies. So let's clear that again. There's one other thing to keep in mind about constraints. You can constrain opposite edges, right? So left and right and top and bottom. The way the constraint engine handles this is if you constrain opposite edges, it will resize the input to fulfill those constraints. So if you did something like this, where you constrain the left edge to the left edge of the parent and the right edge to the right edge, now the input spans the entire layout. You could get fancy and tell the text input to center itself, and it'll center itself no matter where, you know, the width of this. It will always, the text will always be centered in the width of the input. As a demonstration of that, you can go to the constraint tab, and instead of pinning the right edge to the right edge, you can pin the right edge to the horizontal center, and now it goes from the left to the center, and you can see that again. It's always constrained that way. You can also constrain multiple, so like, you know, bottom right, top left. You can center things. So say you wanted this to be roughly the size, but in the center top, right, center it horizontally, pin the top edge to the top edge, and there you go. You have like a header text at the top that will always be there no matter what size. Let's go ahead and delete this. Now, I mentioned earlier that constraints operate on the parent of the input, and in this case the parent was always the layout. One of the other new features that was added was that you can attach an input to another input. And let's say you're streaming a game on Twitch or whatever service. I won't stream a game. I'll just open a movie that's of a game. So you've got, this your main input. For now, I won't. Normally, you would auto fit this, so it would be as big as the layout. But for demonstration purposes, I won't quite do that yet. So you've got your main input. You want to put some text, right? Because you're a Twitch streamer and you have to have text all over your stream. So let's make this smaller and change the color so we can see it. And set a background. This time just do a gradient. And resize this. So let's assume you want this text to always be at the bottom right of your main input, like this. Actually, let's say you want it to be at the bottom center, because that overlaps the actual movie. You could, well, actually, let's auto fit the movie and then do this. Right. Again, it's the same as before. You can move it there, but if you do that, it doesn't stay centered at all. In this case, you could just go to settings and adjust it and do some constraints here. But that would constrain it to the layout. What you actually might want to do is constrain it to this input, right? Easiest way, again, is by demonstration. You'll notice also if you auto fit an input, it's implemented as a series of constraints on it. So let's clear those, and again, that means we can do this. So, how do we attach this text to this movie? Easy. You put it over the movie, right-click it, attach to underlying input. Now, when you move the movie, the text goes with it. Other effects also apply to both of them. Rotation, opacity, just about every geometry and video effect that you would apply to the parent input also applies to the child, which would be the donate button or text. As I said before, constraints apply relative to the parent. So if you constrain this, and also notice that the guidelines are relative to the parent now, not the layout. But let's say, again, we could do this, but if we resize this, it doesn't stay centered. So how do we do that? Again, you just use constraints. You adjust tab, bottom edge to bottom edge, and horizontal center to horizontal center. Now, when we resize this, it stays exactly where we constrained it. And again, if you rotate it, rotates with it, opacity, etc. Inputs can have as many children as you would like to attach to them, and it can go arbitrarily deep, right? You can attach children to children, etc. Again, best demonstrated by example. Let's say you wanted to add a webcam. You'll add your webcam to the layout. Say you wanted to put some text on it. Let's do just some text. Again, font needs to go down a bit. Resize that. So again, right, doesn't move with this input, doesn't move with that input, neither of them do. So place this over the webcam, attach it to the underlying input. Now it is part of that one. Let's put that at the top. Actually, let's make it as wide as the webcam. Put a background color on it so you can see it. There. So now, just like this donate text in the movie moves with it, but now we want the webcam to be part of the movie input too. Okay. So put it over it, attach to the underlying input, and let's say we were place it right center, settings, adjust, right edge to right edge, vertical to vertical, and there it is. Everything is constrained, and if you were to auto fit this, it lays out exactly like you would expect. Mostly just convenience, especially when you want to do things like text and a webcam, but you want to be able to move the webcam around and stuff. Parent input and outputs have other implications, especially for transitions within a input, which I'll cover in another video. But for now, that's it for layout constraints and parent-child relationships. Hopefully it was a little bit helpful to you, and hopefully I'll have some new videos very soon. Thanks for using CocoaSplit. Hope you enjoy it.